Hello and welcome to the Self-Made Podcast. We're going to do a very short solo show today. And this is based off something that comes from a lot of our students. And one thing they struggle with massively is programming. The more and more I see coaches in this industry get caught up in the, let's say, social media bandwagon. They see other coaches online that become glorified life coaches. And we see more and more people talking about ice baths, morning routines, essentially life coaching stuff, and less about personal training. 10, 15 years ago when I started the industry, because I'm an old man now, if you wanted to get more money, you had one option. You got better at your job. But, just put my mic back on, these days, becoming better at your job becomes less of a priority into making the quick buck, living for the laptop lifestyle, trying to get this imaginary Wi-Fi connection from the beach in Bali, and just kind of hoping that our clients get results. I've also seen coaches get so fixated on the nutrition and the activity side because this is where their clients are lacking that they forget what they are, and that's personal trainers. So the aim of this workshop today is to help you as the coach get better at not only creating programs for your clients, but also start to create programs that allow you to think long term. I know you can't respond to me because you're listening to this. I'm used to speaking to a person when I tell you this kind of thing. But what I want you to think about is how long, when a client signs up with you, should you have an idea where their programming is? Should you have the first 4 weeks, the first 8 weeks, the first 12-week block? I would say the absolute minimum you should have is 12 weeks up front, ready to go. But you should have an idea where they're going to be in 6, 12, 24 months from the off. And that's where periodization comes in. So when we talk about program design, and when I talk about it with my students, we talk about it from the perspective of pillars of program design. So if you can go through these pillars, your program design will be considerably easier. And that's what I'm going to teach you today. And what a lot of people get caught up in is what exercise selection is good? What's the best split? Whereas these are far lower down on the priority list. And if you go through these pillars step by step, each further step, each subsequent step will become much easier. So the first thing that many coaches don't do is going to talk about periodization. Now, periodization is a tricky one where some coaches say that it's fundamental. Strength and conditioning coaches say everyone has to periodize. And then you have Gen Pop coaches saying, well, periodizing is pointless because clients are not going to follow it. They're going to miss days. They're going to go on holiday. They're going to book last minute trips to Ibiza. And yeah, that's true. And you can make an argument that periodization isn't useful for that reason. But I would say that periodization is still massively important in a coach's repertoire because it does a few things. Number one, it allows you to showcase to the client that you have the bigger picture and a long term in mind, which aids in retention for that client. It aids in clarity. So when we talk about the hierarchy of needs, which is something I think is very important to understand for adherence, one of those is the need for certainty. And if you're just giving them one workout without any explanation, they might not have any certainty. Well, where's this leading? Where's this going? And when a client feels there's nowhere that it's going, that it's not leading anywhere, they're going to leave. So it gives that client a certainty. Oh, look, Simon or whatever your name is God, this is better than any other coaching practice I've ever been to. Because he's thinking 4, 5, 6 months ahead of time, maybe even a year ahead of time. The second reason why periodization is important, it allows you to zoom out your programming and think of the bigger picture. When coaches get caught up in writing these 4-week blocks, and at the end of it, they write the next 4-week block, they try and fit everything into 4 weeks. Whereas if I can think, okay, I've got a quarter, let's say, and I've got 12 weeks, I can zoom out and go, well, I don't need to hit the bicep from every part of its contractile range in phase 1. Maybe I can periodize that. So let's say I'm working with a beginner. They're very hunched over. They're very kyphotic. I might work into an incline bicep curl in phase 1, which is a position where they're weaker. And it's also going to, byproducts are going to open up the shoulder, open up the pec, open up the long head of the bicep, train them in shoulder extension. And then rather than trying to fit in all the other exercises in the one phase 2, maybe I go short range, where I'm also the weakest. And then I can start to work on the serratus anterior to push that shoulder forward. I can work on the shoulder moving, the shoulder blade moving. And then in phase 3, I can zoom out and kind of go, right, what's my mid-range? This is where I'm strong. I've got the extremities strong. Let's now stick some load on the bar and just push that volume and really get the most from it. And then that's where the growth happens. So that's what it'll do. And another thing that I find that when periodization will do is that it makes program design easier. Because if you're just starting thinking about exercise selection and you have a 17 million exercises you can choose from, program design becomes very overwhelming. Whereas if I can start thinking about, all right, what's the stimulus I'm looking to achieve? Now, what exercises are going to be best for that? I've cut it down. In the same way, like giving macros to a client on day one is very overwhelming. A lot of macros-only coaches fail with their clients. Why? Well, because it's like saying, here's every food in the world. See you next week. Hope you're all right. And clients make mistakes and they're overwhelmed. Whereas if you give them some structure, maybe you give them a meal plan, maybe you give them portion control, maybe you get them to take food pictures. You start with a very small pool of foods. They get comfortable with what's in those foods. And then you add another. And then you add another. And then you add another. In the same way with your program design and periodization. So how do we periodize programs? So I'm going to move over now. Let me just move into this to my iPad here. And you'll be able to see here that 1 to 5 here is going to be strength. So this is purely mainly neurological adaptations. This isn't pure muscle gain. Now, 6 to 8 is going to be functional hypertrophy. So that is a halfway house between strength and hypertrophy. Then we've got our hypertrophy goal. So that's our traditional sort of 8 to 12 bodybuilding style stuff. And above this is going to be strength endurance. So what is the stimulus that you're looking to get out of the training block? That's where we're going to spend the majority of our time, but not all of our time. Because let's say we're going to work on let's say we're going to work on hypertrophy. We're going to spend most of our time between here and here. So most of our blocks are going to be between these two phases. However, sometimes you might want to go down into a strength phase because maybe their limiting factor is that as soon as you get past, let's say, 80 kilo bench press, they start going all over the place. Now we want the nervous system to be able to handle a heavier load. So maybe we start getting to doing 85 for 3 or 85 for 4 or 5, and then we come back, and now they can hold a little bit more for 6 to 10, and we get more out of it. Maybe you spent a lot of time on the high end of this, and they're starting to sort of get tendonitis issues, a lot of DOMs. Maybe a strength phase there can act as a deload to bring inflammation down. Now, let's say here, okay, we want to spend more time. Is there any point of going into a strength endurance phase? Well, if you're a beginner and you want to get the skill of new lifts and start to get comfortable in these lifts, a strength endurance phase could be a good starting point. Alternatively here, let's say you're going into the high intensity work for a while. Maybe the nervous system's a bit fried. Maybe your sleep's getting a bit impaired. Maybe you're getting a little bit anxious. Well, in that case then, a strength endurance phase could use as a deload for a strength block to kind of bring you back down to the center. If you find that your lungs give way on a hack squat before your quads do because your aerobic capacity isn't great, okay, well, maybe we spend a bit of time here before coming back into a hypertrophy phase and getting more out of it and being able to take the quads closer to failure. So this is where periodization can be very, very useful. So that is an overview of why we might periodize. I'm just going to come back up into me again now. So that is an understanding of periodization. It's like, right, we want to spend the most amount of time in the most specific stimulus possible, but when is it possible to take 1 step back to take 3 forward? And that's when you would do the other stimuluses. And we can start then to layer that and do a little bit further and start to look at how we do this in blocks. And this is why if you follow any strength coaches, there's various models of periodization. So the first one we're going to talk about is linear periodization. Linear periodization, in my mind, is the best for beginners because it allows them to start with low loads when they're not very skilled, get a lot of repetitions in and get a lot of frequency in and get good at the lifts. And as they naturally get better at training, we now start to move this into higher intensities. So again, I'm going to go into my iPad mode and show you how this is done. So with a strength endurance model here, so let's say phase 1 here, we might do 10 to 12. Now, this is now a strength endurance phase because let's say this is a beginner. We want to practice the skill of the lift. We want to maybe improve some aerobic conditioning by some of this higher rep count. We want to start with lower loads because you can't actually generate that much intensity. Like they wouldn't actually get much from a 6 rep. Like who's had this where you've done a 6 to 8 rep with a client and they go, okay, I'm good. When actually like, man, you should be fucked by that. Okay, well then let's start here. Maybe they hold tension for 2-3 reps. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong side of this. I meant phase 1, 10 to 12. Sorry. I can rub this out. So let's say we start on that strength endurance phase, we get that little skill. Maybe then they start to hold tension for 4 reps. Then week 6, they hold tension for 6 reps. And then by the time they can hold tension for the full 10 to 12 reps, and they're starting to get a little bit more DOMs from this is the time then to move them into phase 2, where we do maybe 8 to 10 reps. So maybe go 3 times 10 to 12, 4 times 8 to 10, and then maybe phase 3 is 4 times 6 to 8. So now we've increased the intensity block by block as they become more proficient. And if you feel they're safe enough and they can handle loads well enough, maybe phase 4 goes into 5 times 5. That's an easy way to then progress them to a peak at that strength phase, while starting them in a very safe, easy way to improve and then work with them as they move up. So that is linear periodization. And I think that is probably where most of you as program designers, if you're starting out looking at periodization, should start. Start people on the highest and work down. The advantage of this, as I said, it's not a big jump in intensity compared to some of the other models we will look at shortly. But so that means it's good for a beginner. If I went from 15 reps to 5 reps, that's a very massive leap in load, which you might not be able to handle, and it might not be very, very safe, right? It's also very easy to write because you can basically just going down the blocks. The disadvantage of linear periodization, and why I don't think it's particularly good for intermediate or advanced trainees, is that, like, by the time you've got to phase 4 or phase 5, you spent so long away from the strength endurance phase that you may have detrained so much and lost a lot of the benefits which you got from the first strength endurance phase. You just spent too far away from it. And in the same way that when you actually kind of get to strength again, you spend so far away from that strength phase, you've lost a lot of the benefits that you got from being in that strength phase to begin with. So that is the beginner way of looking at it. The second way I would look at it is something called undulating periodization. So undulating, again, moving down onto my iPad, is where we're going to intersperse between high intensities and high volumes. So if we looked at here, let me rub a few of these out. So we're not, I've not got too much stuff on my screen. So in the linear model, we do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. An undulating model, we're basically going to switch the middle two around. So phase 1, then we go phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So now we've gone from what we call a accumulation 1 of a strength endurance, right? And then we go to an intensification 1 of functional hypertrophy. Then we go back to accumulation 2. So that's a progression from phase 1. So phase 3 and phase 1 are going to be a progression from each other. And then we peak at strength for phase 4. And then that's a progression from our phase 2. So this, and as I move back to me, is a great way to kind of get each 4 weeks work on a new skill. So for people who want novelty in the training, this is good because 1 4 weeks block, or however long you want your training blocks to be, it doesn't have to be 4 weeks. People do 3, people do 4. I think blocks are really dependent on the goal. If you're working on a hypertrophy goal, that can be a longer block. That could be 6, 10, 12, 16 weeks. But when we go into pure strength, which is really nervous system taxing, or pure strength endurance, which is really volume taxing, these phases might be a little bit shorter because it's like we're just putting the foot down and hammering the red line in one direction. This middle ground can be done a bit longer. Whatever your phases are, you've got one phase when you're focusing on more strength and putting load on the bar, another phase focusing on a pump and volume. So people are like novelty, this works really, really well. It also means we don't detrain too much from one phase to the next because we're always, in each phase, we're coming back up into more volume or back up into more intensity, while still allowing us to peak at the end of the block. So there are 2 basic ways of looking at periodization. And what I would do is that once we've done this and we've understood periodization, every other decision now becomes easier. For example, if we do a linear periodization model, we now know our reps are going to be starting higher at anywhere between that 12 reps to 20 reps plus range. So now we know, because of that, what are our sets going to be? We're not going to do 8 sets of 20 because the session will be about 17 hours long. So we're now going to maybe do 2 sets or 3 sets. The sets are going to be lower. What is the tempos going to be? they're going to be more controlled. You're not going to have as many slow eccentrics because, again, the session would take too long. What is the rest periods? They're going to be shorter for the same reason. And we're looking with strength endurance to accumulate some fatigue, right? So again, because we've decided the periodization model, we now know the reps. And because we now know the reps, we know the rest of the workout variables. Now, then we go into exercise selection, which is another topic in itself. But at a basic nutshell, are you going to be doing sets of 20 deadlifts? Probably not. Are you going to be doing sets of 5 leg extensions? Almost certainly not. So because of this, you now have this massive pool of exercise selections that's now come down to what is perfect for the stimulus we're looking to achieve. Strength endurance is probably going to be more stable, maybe more machine-based exercise, maybe more lower skill necessity for this. And then on the strength side of stuff, you may be looking at more compound, multi-joint lifts, maybe high skill related stuff. Now, on the strength side of things, you're probably also going to have higher rest periods because you don't want to accumulate fatigue and strength. It's about load on the bar. So you might take 2 minutes rest on there. You might have slower eccentrics. You might have more pauses. So hopefully by this point, you can start to see that choosing your periodization model allows you to choose your reps. And choosing your reps allows you to pick the rest of the workout with ease. It takes so many decisions out of your head and makes program design much, much easier, and also allows you to get creative with the bit that matter, the fun bit, the working around people's individual structures or planning the long term for their goal and troubleshooting. So that is a couple of ways I would look at periodization. Before I head off to that, and hopefully this has been helpful to understand periodization, I'm going to give you one more, and that's basically just going to be how I personally go over working with let's say an intermediate trainee. So someone that's not a complete beginner, where I would use linear model to get them there. This is how I'd work, and this is why I would work this way. So again, I'm going to come into my iPad here, and we're going to see in phase 1, and we're assuming here this is going to be a hypertrophy client. And I know this is obviously mirrored for how this is going to look for you, but I hope it makes sense. So we've got hypertrophy. So I'm going to talk through it. So we've got hypertrophy here. And then we're going to pick 1 to 2 body parts that are the key focus. So let's say it's going to be chest and shoulders. Okay, cool. So we're going to look at chest and shoulders in that phase 1, right? This is going to maybe be 2 sets, top set, back off set, old school bodybuilding, and that will run for, let's say, anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks. So that's phase 1, and that's going to be the main bulk of our training because this client's goal is hypertrophy. Then I'll go into phase 2, right? So with phase 2, I'm now going to do what I call super compensation. So super compensation now is pushing that volume a little bit more deliberately to crash their metrics. So to explain that, when we sort of have a stress on the body, so training, we don't grow in the gym, we grow when we rest and recover. So in training, I will create a stress, I will temporarily get weaker. If I recover from the stress, I will super compensate and get stronger. Now, as we do more and more training, become more and more advanced, it's going to take more and more volume, more and more intensity to hit the level of threshold we need for an adaptation. So how do we work this out? Well, we can look at things like blood pressure and resting heart rate and our stress markers, and maybe even HRV, if you can interpret that well, to decide when somebody's actually starting to get pushed past the level they can naturally handle. Like, we're deliberately overtraining here, and then we're using that back off to super compensate and gain some tissue. This is the same way as, like, you've seen people that train really hard for a holiday and they look fine and look good. They go away on holiday, and then the first couple of days of holiday, they look tons better. And that's because of the super compensation method. So we're deliberately pushing to where their metrics start to crash with this higher volume approach, and then we back off. So that could be done by a week off. Or in this case, phase 3, it's going to be strength. So strength is going to be in phase 3 here. So phase 2, this super compensation is going to be high volume, maybe a strength endurance phase, which could be local, so in the muscle, or systemic, working on the cardiovascular system. And deliberately push volume until metrics crash. And then the strength phase, we pick whatever strength stimulus that we want to use. Let's say here I'm going to do a 752 wave load because I like that. This means now over this block, we can now peak strength. We can gather info. We can gather weaknesses, strengths, weaknesses. And we use those strengths and weaknesses then at the end of this block to get on a call with your client, say, how's the last quarter gone? What's gone well? What's not gone well? And we use the information here to build a new phase one. I'll turn this around now so you can see it in the right way. We build a new phase one with new target areas. So maybe now their chest and shoulders look good, and maybe we'll do a back and arms focus split, go into a high volume version of this, and then another strength phase, which is going to, maybe we could progress this. Maybe we'll do 8 sets of 2, which will progress from the first phase. And then we gather the information from that, come back to the start, pick new body part goals, pick new physique goals, pick new strength goals, and we can work to those. So that is a very, very short overview, a very short episode on periodization. This can get really nerdy if you want to, but I want to give you an overview and why you as a coach should be doing it. If you have any questions at all, please fire them away. Instagram at Kingsley Dutton is probably the best place to go. And as always, my door is always open. So if you want more of these solo shows, drop me a message, let me know the topics you'd like to cover, and I'll make sure I get onto it. See you later, guys. Hopefully this has helped.